Welcome to Law and Order Bucks. I'm your host, Bucks County Sheriff Fred Herron. Every corner of Bucks County has a story to tell. Sometimes a story of resilience. Sometimes a story that chills us to the bone. Sometimes a story of government not being able to get out of its own way. Here, the forces of law and order are constantly at work, often behind the scenes. Join us as we delve into the gripping realities of crime and justice in our community. We'll explore the hidden worlds, the difficult decisions, and the unwavering commitment it takes to maintain law and order right here in Bucks County. Well, here we are, episode 2020. I cannot believe we have 20 episodes. We're kicking these out every week. So a couple more episodes, I guess we're on half a year. But episode 20, we decided to do some takes from all our 19 best shows and give you a little taste of what we just did 19 weeks in a row. So enjoy Law and Order, BUX, Bucks, episode 20.
When my time back there, I stumbled upon some old cases that were unsolved. One was a homicide of a 14-year-old girl that happened in 1984. Her name was Barbara Rowan. And then, and I should say that when I found these cases, I was recovering from knee surgery. So I was on desk duty. I couldn't go out into the field and do anything. So I was, other than being able to type and talk on the phone, I think I was driving Sergeant Kurgan out of her mind. And she said, why don't you take a look at one of these old files? And she actually mentioned the Rowan case, which I was unaware of, or I thought I was unaware of at the time. Lo and behold, later on, I found out I remember hearing about the case when I was a teenager. But
what year was that, Chris? What year was that case?
That case happened in August of 1984.
Okay.
And the original investigators did a great job. Barbara Rowan was a 14-year-old girl. She lived in the Trevose area of Ben Salem. And on August 3rd, 1984, she didn't come home. Back in those days, when the street lights came on, that was when curfew, you had to be home. That's how I was raised too. And unfortunately, Barbara did not come home that night. It was reported. There was people looking for her. Police were looking for her. And unfortunately, they never found her for 13 days. And then on August 16th, they found her skeletal remains. Not far, about a quarter mile away, right off of Route 1. And the original investigators did a very good job. They honed in on the right person. To quote Jennifer Shorn, that they cast a very wide net and they narrowed it down, and they were pointing to the right two people, but it was all circumstantial. And at the time, they just did not have what the DA's office then felt was sufficient evidence to charge. So the case, it got shelved. And so 16 years later, it was given to me, and I looked at it and I read it multiple times, and I said, this case needs to be solved. And as you know, I kind of drove a lot of people crazy because I was always constantly working on it. But, I had the support of you. I had the support of the DA's office, and I had the support of the original investigators who I would consult with from time to time. And it was something that I had to work on the side from now and then, but still doing my other cases. But, with the title of your episode, Warming Up Cold Cases, and I'm sure Allison will agree with me, that in my experience, one of the things to do with a cold case is to bring it up to modern standards. What can we do now that we couldn't do back then? And, with forensics, that there's a lot. And there was some forensic work in there was no DNA involved in that case, but we were able to, through the grand jury, investigative grand jury, and Jennifer Shorn is an expert at that, in my opinion. We were able to get one of the two defendants to actually admit to what happened. And then also with forensics, there was some tape involved that was unfortunately used on the victim, and rolls of that tape were the same type of tape were found at the defendant's home. And the FBI was actually able to show that the tape originated from the same source, and it was not a tape that you or I could go buy in a retail store. He worked at a factory where it was actually manufactured. So it took a while. I mean, I reopened that case in June of 2002, and we made our first arrest in September of 2015. So it took a while, but we did make an arrest, and we got a conviction on that, and delayed, but nevertheless, justice was obtained for that.
So, you know, and you've been very pretty famous in the Bucks County for working cold cases. I am, and run us by one where we jumped in and you were able to use genealogy, and especially getting a genetic genealogy expert. And then we're going to turn it over to Allison and see how does that really play out. Because we all know, you know, all these different companies out there where we give up our DNA and stuff. And I did it, you know, I did it, and that's a story for another day, but it led me to family members and stuff. But let's talk about one of those, Chris, and then we're going to get Allison involved with that, and how you know, when your work stops in that one aspect, how does it just begin for her?
So right around the time I opened the Rowan case, I found some other files, and I opened this one file, and the first thing I saw was this you know, big photograph of a human skull, which clearly grabbed my interest, and I started looking through it. And it was the skeletal remains that Bensalem police discovered in January of 1988 in the old abandoned, Publica, the abandoned distillery on State Road.
I was on the crime scene there. I remember.
Right, you were one of the first patrolmen to respond to that. That's right. Yeah. And it was in a well, an underground well, which was part of this distillery. There was valves and pipes down there. And this particular individual, she was, it was, you know, the anthropologist and the autopsy was done. It was a female. She was estimated to be between about 17 to 22 years old. And she was also pregnant. So along with her remains, there were fetal bones as well. And I remember, when I first got hired in Bensalem, I remember Director Friel he was a member of the VDOC Society, and he had asked Frank Bender to do a sculpture over the skull of what that person may have looked like in life. I remember seeing it in his office one day, and I asked him, I said, "Who's that?" And he was like, that's the question. Who is that? And he told me about it. So way back when, I was kind of interested in that case. And then about, over 10 years later, I actually got to work on it. So I wanted, again, to bring that case up to current standards. And I was able to get a grant to get her remains sent to University of North Texas, the Center for Human Identification, and we got a DNA profile to put into the CODIS system. And I was hoping that maybe, there was a family reference sample in the CODIS system from somebody who had a missing relative that would.
And just say we're gonna dive into CODIS next week. So okay. Everybody come back to hear all about CODIS. Go ahead.
Unfortunately, I didn't get any hits. I didn't get any matches, and we had another missing girl from Bensalem named Tracy Bird, and Tracy was around the same age and appeared to be the same height and stature as this deceased female. And there was also a rumor that Tracy had run away because she was pregnant. And again, this female was pregnant. So I thought, well, I'm going to track down Tracy's family. And I did. And I got DNA samples from all of them, and I tried, but there was no match. So I really thought it was going to be her. So I was trying to do things that I could do now that what the police weren't able to do back in 1988. So one thing we had was the internet. We didn't have that back then. So I was putting it on every unsolved homicide case that was out there. I was putting the pictures up and just a synopsis of the case. And there was jewelry that was found with her, and which was some distinct. There was a couple rings. The one ring looked like a belt buckle. And she had some designer clothes. Yeah, she had other clothes with her. It seemed like maybe she had a suitcase and somebody may have dumped it there. I don't think where she was found was where she died. I always thought she was placed there, but I then worked with the National Center for Missing Exploited Children, and I remember I took the skull to St. Mary's Hospital, and they donated a 3D CAT scan, And then I sent those films down, and they used a computer program to render what this computer program thought she may have looked like in life. I put that out there. So I was doing everything I could think of. And then, you know, as time went on, investigative genetic genealogy came on the scene. And and prior to that, I tried phenotyping, but that didn't work. And then when investigative genetic genealogy became an option, I remember I asked the boss at the time, I said, you know, I think we can afford this. And that was you. And you had made arrangements for Bodie to do the lab work on it for us, which, you know, ultimately was the beginning of this case being solved.
Yeah, we've been very lucky to be able to get a lot of stuff done for cheap or almost nothing over the years. So that's you know, we were very lucky in Bensalem to be able to have those connections. So you wound up with DNA on this.
Yeah, they were able to get a good profile and upload it into I think it was GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. And the genealogist I was working with, I really couldn't keep up with her at the time.
Right. So I think that was how long, Chris?
4 days. I mean,
go ahead.
Yeah, and it was, and when I say I couldn't keep up with her, I'm really not embellishing. It was like she would call me, check your email. She would text me, check your email. And as the family tree was being built, and you know, it's sometimes, you know, we had I think it was a first cousin association with this young woman that lived out in the Poconos area, and I really would have preferred to have just gone and knocked on her door, but you know, I can't always get there in a timely fashion. So
right.
I was making some phone calls that were kind of, you know, hi, this is Detective McMullen, and this is going to be a strange phone call, but this is what I'm doing, and I have this case, and did you ever have a missing relative? So when I called this woman, she was very nice, you know, and I told her why I was calling, and she said, you know, I would love to help you. I'm really interested in this. I was adopted, so I don't know, you know, if I have any relatives that went missing. And as much as she wanted to help me, she really couldn't point me in the right direction. So I was kind of upset about that. So we kept going. And then on day 4, I was given some information. Once again, check your email. And I look, and in my email, there was 2 names, Joseph Todd and Lisa Todd. And I was told Jane Doe is their sister. Now, with Jane Doe, you know, I was starting to think that maybe she wasn't from the Philadelphia or, you know, Bucks County area, because the case had been in the media so much, and with the recreations and things like that, I was starting to think maybe she's from the other side of the country. But anyway, these people live 15 minutes away in Northeast Philadelphia, literally 15 minutes from where the remains were found. So I tried to call these people, and I had some trouble getting through, but I found a email address for Joseph Todd's daughter, and I just Hail Married her and sent her an email. This is who I am. Would you mind calling me? There's no problem, but I think I could use your help on a long-term investigation I'm doing. She called me right back. So I started talking with her, and I told her who I was and why I was calling. And I explained it to her, and I said, you know, did your father ever have a sister that disappeared, that vanished? And this girl, she was only about 20, 21 years old. So she hadn't even been born when Jane Doe was found. And she paused and she said, yeah, he did. He had a sister that vanished in 1985.
Wow.
And I said, what was her name? And she said, Lisa. And her name was Lisa Todd. So I said, all right, I need to speak with your father. And she got me in touch with Dad. And he was very emotional on the phone. And I went down to see him, myself and a couple other detectives, and I brought photographs of the clothing and the jewelry and whatnot. And we did some follow-up testing, you know, direct testing between him and the Jane Doe remains. And she was positively identified. And we found out that she had been reported missing in October of 1985 in Philadelphia.
I remember it well, the case.
Yeah, unfortunately, after her 18th birthday, she was purged from the system.
Yeah.
And so by the time our department found her in 88, there was nothing in there to match, the criteria of this Jane Doe. So she was a Jane Doe for about 36 years.
Unbelievable. You know, maybe one episode, Chris, we'll talk about missing persons. TV has done us an injustice with people don't understand how it works. And we really probably need to delve into that. You just, made me think of that. But so I remember, when you went down and you come back and you said, hey, we've identified her.
Yeah.
And I don't remember, Chris, do we know of a mechanism of death, or we're not sure?
It was undetermined.
Undetermined.
I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's
right. I remember we had some issues with the cause of death, but so it's undetermined, but a family has closure. Allison, when you hear this, when you hear a story like this, and you're behind the scenes, you're at a desk, you're in a lab, and you're doing all your computer work, what do you feel when you hear this?
It is a very emotional process. I could tell you a story. I had worked on a case once, and it was a case that was well covered in a lot of, crime podcast and things like that. And one of the crime podcasts, like 10 years before the case had even come to me, had interviewed the victim. It was a homicide case, had interviewed the victim's mother. And the mother at the time was already fairly elderly, and she was crying on the podcast and she said something like, please don't let me go to my grave without knowing what happened to my child. That was the motivation I needed. And I worked that case as hard as I could with my partners in law enforcement for about 4 years. And we solved it, and we got her answers before she passed. So that, the family is the motivation, being able to give people back their loved ones, or in this case, answers during their lifetime on what happened. It gives me goosebumps. I'm sitting here chilled just talking about it. But
I can relate.
Yeah, it's a very emotional, very passionate thing. And I think for any of us who have worked are in this field or worked on components of cases, it's what keeps you going. It's not only solving it, but knowing that none of us are here alone. We have extended kin and family, and people are looking for answers and looking for closures. And being able to give that to people is making this job worthwhile. It's why it makes those sleepless nights when I'm laying in bed trying to connect the genealogy dots in my head to come up with answers. It makes it worthwhile to be able to do that. It's a very emotional process.
I couldn't agree more. When this case was solved, the closure that it brought the two siblings was immeasurable. And then I found out that Lisa had a 2-year-old son when she disappeared. I'm not going to say his name, but I did track him down, and he lived out of state, but he flew in to see me, and we spoke with him, and he was the nicest guy in the world. And he said, I can't thank you enough. He said, I spent my whole life thinking my mother had abandoned me.
Wow.
And, and unfortunately, she died very young, but in his mind, okay, it wasn't by choice that he was separated. And that always, like you said, just to bring closure. I always refer these cases to that story called the Starfish story, which I believe Sheriff. It was written by Lauren Isley. I wish I could say I wrote it, because I think it's the greatest story ever. But
tell it.
That's the story. There's a lot of different versions of it, but the nutshell, or the story goes: there's a beach after a big storm, a hurricane, and there's thousands of starfish washed up along the shore. And a young boy is running around frantically, and he's picking them up and he's throwing them back into the ocean. And he winds up crossing paths with this older guy, this well-educated man who feels he's very scholarly. And he says to the boy, he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, if I don't throw the starfish back in the ocean, they're going to die." And the man says, "Take a look at the beach. There's thousands. How can you possibly make a difference?" And the little boy reaches down, picks up a starfish, throws it in the ocean. He says, "I made a difference to that one."
And with that said, I'm going to turn this over from the beginning so that Ashley, my good friend, she can tell you her story. And after you hear what she has to say, you're going to finish this podcast and you're going to start writing letters and making calls. Without further ado, a true hero in my eyes, a woman that goes around state by state making change. Some people say it, she does it. Ashley, take it away.
Oh, thank you so much, Sheriff. And I'm honored to be on this podcast. I'm excited for you to spread your message far and wide because you are one of my heroes. You said I was, but you really are. You've been championing, DNA advocacy and justice and keeping our community safe and for decades. So I'm so grateful. And it's very important to me, not just because I'm a mother now, but because I am a survivor. I was 19. This was years ago at this point now. It was 2003. I live in Texas. That's where I was from. And I was just, an excited college student, wanting to be a 19-year-old, spread my wings, go back to school. And I went to college early. This was the start of my sophomore year. I had a great time my freshman year. And a lot of people I knew in Austin just kind of stayed home, So I felt like really liberated that I had chosen to fly and get out of the nest and meet new people. And so I went to school like a week and a half early before it started my sophomore year to get to know my new roommate, to move into my apartment. And, Phoenix at that point and Tempe, Scottsdale area, it was very college centered. It's grown a lot, but it was really based around the school at that point. And so I lived in a giant apartment complex, and it was primarily college students that lived there. So at the time that I went, because I went early, it was a little bit isolated. Now that I reflect on it, there weren't a lot of kids coming in and out, but, we moved in and they put us in the very back corner unit on the ground floor. It was Building K. I will never, ever forget it. And I remember it was pretty desolate. It was an empty parking lot. And then there was a fence and then just big trees that, blocked what was ever behind it, another neighborhood. But I was thrilled to be back, and I went out with my girlfriends. We were so happy to be reunited that night. But before I went out, it was really strange because I'm talking on the phone to my mom, and we had become very close since I had left. And, it was a really hot Arizona night and the sun was setting. And I remember it just, turned shades, almost like a painting from, blue to orange to darkness. And in that time when I'm speaking to my mom, I just all of a sudden felt this nudge that was deep in like the pit of my stomach, that something was really wrong. And it wasn't like an anxious feeling like in the chest. I thought maybe, I'm 19, I'm going out with my friends. Maybe we're going to get into some college age trouble, and I was like, oh no, I hope not, I had no clue, but I knew something was terribly, terribly wrong. And it got so profound that I didn't want to hang up the phone. And I eventually did. And I went out with my friends. We took a cab home later. We all were hanging out in my apartment, and my roommate at the time, she had a new guy over, and they went to bed in her room. She was in the master bed, and I had about 5 girls over, and we were just talking, and one of our friends had suffered a really tragic loss in high school, and we were just consoling her still. And it got so late a few times. I remember I told my friends, I'm like, why don't you just stay here? You can, take my bed, the couch, we can make a pallet on the floor, whatever. Just stay here. It's getting so late. And, eventually they just decided they needed to go home. So they all got cabs, and I went to bed as I always did. I was very fortunate in my life. I always felt safe. My parents made me feel protected and cared for. And so I never in a million years could have imagined how my life was about to be shattered, ever. And I went to bed that night, as I always did, feeling safe. And unfortunately, this night I just wasn't. And while I was asleep, an intruder entered my apartment, came into my bed, and I always slept. It's kind of weird now that I think about it, but I always slept on my belly, and I put a pillow behind my head because it could help keep light out. And I couldn't hear things. It's just how I always slept. That's very strange, but kind of like the perfect storm, because I was asleep like that, and he came into my bed and, smothered me with the pillow. And I just remember vividly thinking, oh my gosh, wake up from this nightmare. Wake up, wake up. I kept saying that into my head. Wake up, Ashley. This is a nightmare. And, normally we can shake ourselves from these nightmares, but this night I couldn't. And I thought, oh my God, I am going to die right now. Like, I am going to die. And I tried to fight with everything in me to make it stop. And at that moment, I was nearly killed. He had flipped me over, smothered my face, and began to beat me so severely. And I knew I had two choices. I fight and I'm killed right now, or I have to let this happen to try to live. And so I really wanted to live. And so I was very violently raped and beaten and tortured in unimaginable ways for hours throughout the night. But I'm very fortunate because I survived. I didn't think I would. And, you know, when he decided he was done, I remember I couldn't see anything, but I could see out of the periphery of the pillow, and I just saw his two fingers open the blinds, and I remember seeing the sun shine in, and I thought, oh my gosh, it's morning. Like, how could no one hear me? How, like, I couldn't believe it. But he ended up, you know, crawling off me, and he just said, do not remove the pillow from your face until I'm gone, and do not tell anybody, because if you do, I will be watching you, just like I was watching you and your friends before, and I will come and kill you.
Unbelievable. That's just, you know, I've, and how many times have I heard this story now? And, you know, I there's no words, but oh my God.
You know, I feel the same way too. In many ways, I feel like I've come so far, but it's interesting because my son, he's 11 now, and sometimes he'll come into my room in the middle of the night, and he told me 2 days ago, he's like, Mom, every time I come in, you're like, ah. He's like, what happened to you? That was so dramatic, you know? And I realized, like, as much as you can heal, some things just stick with you. Because it was a nightmare, but I am very lucky that I survived, but it was not, the journey has not been easy. And, you know, I realized quickly when I thought he was gone, I jumped out of the bed, I slammed the door shut, I locked the door, and I frantically looked for clothes and my phone. I knew I'd gone to bed with it, and it was gone. So I broke my bedroom window, jumped out, and then ran around to my roommate's master bed. And I just was banging on her outside door, screaming I'd been raped, you know, called 911. And I will never forget the look on her and the guy's face when they just saw me standing there. I had like blood dripping down my entire body, and they were in a deep, when I reflect now, they were in a deep state of shock too, you know. Absolutely. These horrific, violent crimes, they just tear up communities and everybody, not just the people that are the actual victims. It victimizes and terrorizes. I mean, you think about it, we were 19. This is just not unbelievable, you know. And they called 911, and I paced the parking lot. I didn't want to go inside, and it felt like, I mean, I have no idea how long it took. It felt like hours, but I have no idea. And again, no one's around because it's empty. And so I'm just, you know, the sun's up, and finally law enforcement shows up, and I see the police car, and we just lock eyes. He pulls up next to me, and he just mouths the words, "Oh my God," when he saw me. And, you know, I don't even think they understood calling 911, how severe it was. Right. But, you know, everything kind of went numb after that, everything. And I don't remember much. I was in a deep state of shock, but he was really an angel. He made me feel safe, and he calmed me. He made me feel believed. His name's Officer Williams, and I actually have a book that came out this year. And ironically, the day it was published, I reached out to him to say, you've been such a hero to me, and you're in my story. And he told me, this is the day of my retirement. I can't believe this. So,
oh my God.
I know. And
that's crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
Tell everybody the name of the book. What do you do?
So
Come on.
Silent Witness: How DNA Uncovered the Truth and Empowered My Healing. Oh, thank you. There it is. I still can't believe it. So every time I see it, and what an honor that you have.
It's a great book. It's a great read. And it really, and I've heard your story, I don't know how many times. And then reading this, I learned a lot more about you and about everything that happened and what you went through and the healing. And I think this is a very important book for people. You know, unfortunately, there's a lot of folks that have gone through the trauma that you have gone through. And I think this book is very powerful. And it's an easy read. I mean, it's not something you're going to get like, oh, this book is so big, I can't get it. You are going to pick this up and you're not going to move till it's done. So I recommend this for and for law enforcement. This isn't just for folks that have been through this. This is for people that are in the field, whether you're a sane nurse or law enforcement or elected officials, legislators need to read this book.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's the whole journey, and he was a big part of that because, what I realize now is he was that first touch point, and had he treated me differently, I don't know, I would have been too scared the trauma was so severe. And so he was just such like an angel, and he took me to the apartment. And I remember the first thing I saw in front of my roommate's door was like a bar stool and a pillow and like some like picture frame, because I guess the guy wanted to have warning, so their door would open out. So if anyone heard him, it would knock it all over. And so that was really, it took me aback. And he just, realized quickly she didn't see anything. We need to get you down to a clinic. And I mean, this was before, podcasts like this, maybe CSI was on. I was definitely not watching it. Crime shows to me were not like a thing that I was ever watching, And so I didn't know anything what a rape kit was or what a forensic examination was. I had no idea what he was talking about, but I just remember him saying, we need to get you down there safely and quick. And I was like, I am not going anywhere. I first have to shower. I need to brush my teeth. I want to change my clothes. I feel disgusting. And, my heart just broke when he said, I'm so sorry, you can't do that. And, because now it's like, oh, okay, that's the evidence. And so I trusted him. I went and had a forensic examination done. She was an angel. You've met her, actually, Jennifer. She was another. I had so many incredible people on my path. And I don't remember the hours of the photographs and the swabbing and being in a sterile room. I remember she made me feel safe. And she started a journey of healing for me. And, I worked day and night with detectives. They were incredible. They were tough, and they wanted, they became so invested. They had kids as well, so it became bigger than just me. It was for them. I tried to go to school, but at this point I was all over the news, and I was like the victim, and I was all bruised up at the first week of school. And I had to leave class because I had the most intense panic attack, because I thought, is he sitting behind me? He told me,
right,
only one, he's going to come back and kill me. And it's all over the news now. He's seen probably law enforcement at my apartment if he's watching. I was terrified. So I dropped out of school. I moved to Newport Beach, California, and I eventually relocated back to my home state of Texas. And, over that journey, I went through some really scary times of numbing out with alcohol, everything you can imagine. I wasn't talking about it, living in total silence. But I did find some healing modalities that got me on my feet. I ended up graduating college, which was a really big deal. I got a job, like things that seemed unattainable after my assault. Even without closure, I was healing, but it was 7 years later in Texas, and I got the shocking phone call that there was a DNA match, and I couldn't believe it. The range of emotions, of course, relief, but I was also slightly angry, because I thought, why now? I've nearly killed myself, not just from what happened, but like I felt like I was in like the depths of hell, right? And I've crawled myself out. And it was shocking.
Yeah, and that's a very amazing point, because I've dealt with survivors and people have been through this, and the DNA matches come years and years later. I don't even know if what I'm going to say is possible, but you're on that healing process, at least I would imagine, to some degree, as best as you can. And now it's just all of a sudden 8, 7, 8, 9, some cases longer, it just comes right back. Did this just come back as the day it happened when you got that match?
Yes, because I was living in, my own brother didn't know what happened to me. Okay, so once I had left Arizona, I said, I am never being a victim again. I've never talked. So I hadn't processed any of it, right? Like I had not processed it. So it was wild. And the craziest part is, so I moved to Newport Beach, just kind of random, a girl that I went to school with. We both were like, let's just go. It was kind of Thelma and Louise. We packed up at school when everyone was, away for Christmas break, and we didn't tell anyone we were leaving. We just dropped out of ASU and, packed our car up and we left, and we decided we were moving to Newport Beach, California, out of all the places. She was from Minnesota. I was from Texas. We were like, let's just go to the ocean and figure it out.
Yeah.
That's what we did. But crazily, when I get the call, he was actually arrested in Newport Beach.
Crazy.
That's where he's from. And I don't know, have you been to Newport Beach before?
I actually have been to Newport Beach once before when I was like 13 or 14. I was in Newport Beach. I actually camped out on it's another long story, but I camped out on Newport Beach.
Yeah, okay. So it's a tiny beach town. If people
Yes.
listeners aren't familiar, it's very small. I lived on 40th Street. He was apprehended on 41st Street for an unrelated offense. He was trying to break into a home where these 3 young girls lived. Law enforcement officers saw him. They got into some sort of altercation. He ended up resisting the officer's arrest, which is a felony in California. And thankfully, California is one of 19 states. My home state of Texas became the 19th in 2023 that collects DNA for every single felony arrest. Because of that law, it triggered a process that would put him behind bars for nearly 138 years. So when they arrested him, they took his fingerprints at the booking station and his photographs. They took a minimally invasive cheek swab. They uploaded it into our national DNA database, CODIS, which you spoke to earlier. And it hit a match back to mine and multiple others all those years before across state lines. So he had taken odd jobs as like painters. That's probably what was happening. He was working on the apartment in some way. He had traveled all over the world for the Olympics. When they arrested him, not only does he have a wife and a son, but he had a shed behind his home full of women's underwear and ID cards from all over the world.
Actually, talk about, because I'd rather it come from you than from me, the 2013 King versus Maryland.
So after he was arrested, we had to wait 5 years for trial, okay, which is crazy. So, but part of that was because of this very, very, very important Supreme Case Court ruling, Maryland versus King, which you just said, 2013. They found that taking DNA cheek swab for qualifying arrest is a reasonable and just part of the booking procedures. They compare it to fingerprinting. So because of that ruling, and they said it is reasonable under the 4th Amendment, because of that ruling, we were able to go to trial. And in trial, they were able to prove it was 38 trillion times more likely his DNA than anybody else's. Had they not found that, he would have gotten off and he would still be out there today, raping, harming, and what his sister said, murdering other people.
And I think that's the key. I think, the highest court in the land has spoken. And, not that my opinion matters, but I agree. I mean, we take people's fingerprints. This is not new. DNA is just new technology. And CODIS has been around since 98. It's just new tech. Who knows? Eyeretinas might be the thing that we take in, 10 years from now, 5 years from now. Who knows? But if that's what technology allows, we should take advantage of it. So the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, has ruled, and yet we still have states that are gun shy, including right here in Pennsylvania. And we have some state representatives and state senators here in PA that have tried, and this keeps, we got not close. We got it out of Senate committee last year. But some of our own people here in Bucks County, didn't want it out of committee. And I don't understand that, because, what you went through, this could be avoided for other individuals. I'm not sure if it could have ever been avoided for you, but it certainly could have been avoided by others. I don't know the answer how many times he's been arrested, but it's not about that right now. It's about this legislation and your story, because it's not a story we read about somebody else. It's you, who I know very well, and you're live. You're here.
Right.
I pulled into headquarters, and I came out, and my sergeant was there. He goes, "You're okay. Don't worry about it. The chief wants to see you about something." I'm like, well, this doesn't sound good. And he calls me in his office, and he says, I want you to go up to Doylestown and meet with the district attorney and Paul Gorley, who was the chief of county detectives at the time. He says, they have an assignment if you're interested in, but I don't really want to talk about it here. So I went up, and they asked me, because I was new to the area and I was very young looking. I was 24 at the time, but I looked much younger. I wish that was so today. And they said, would you be interested in going undercover in a high school? A superintendent reached out to us. They're having some problems with drugs and they want to tackle it. And for me, 21 Jump Street was hot on television. So I'm like, wait a minute, you're going to pay me to go back to high school? And they said, yeah. And we'll talk a little bit more about it. But, this was now September of I think September of 98. I was like a couple months out of the police academy, which was good, right? Because I didn't have those police tendencies that we know about today, certain things that, after so many years, you and I do being police officers and being in law enforcement. But it was just, it was a great opportunity. We're going to come back to it. But, then a couple years later, I'm back on the street and you come into Bensalem. And how did it happen for you?
Well, for me, I've never touched the street. So when I graduated the academy and I was with Kelleher and Frank Davis and that group, we basically all with 7 of us. We come back, everybody gets their assignment. This is your FTO, your field training officer. And I'm the only one that doesn't have a field training officer that says, see Director Friel. So the same thing. I'm like, wait, maybe I'm not getting the job. So I figured I did well in the academy, but yeah, I went to see Director Friel, and he's like, hey, good news and bad news. And I'm like, sure. He goes, what do you want first? And I said, I'll take the bad news. He goes, the bad news is not going to patrol. So what's the good news? He goes, well, same thing. You're going to have to meet with Alan Rubenstein, who was the DA at the time.
Mine too, the DA, yeah.
And so I had to go up to Doylestown, met him, and he goes, listen, this is the assignment. You were on loan from Bensalem to Falls Township. You're going to be at Pennsbury High School as a senior. And there are numerous investigations that they've tried to tap into some sources, and a lot of the students there have connections so we want to put you there. And I'm like, whatever you want me to do. So I went in there. That was in January of 1993. And I actually I had to go up with Jack Jones. I don't know if you remember Jack Jones.
Oh, I do remember Jack, of course.
He's my uncle. So he poses my uncle. And literally when I introduced him to some of the kids that saw me with him, he's my uncle. He's a cop. My family sent me to Pennsylvania, and they sent me with him because he's going to have his thumb on me and he's going to, make me behave. So, but that was the way I got into the little sting operation. So I was scared, and what do I know?
Yeah. You know what? It was, and I'm talking to somebody who certainly knows what I'm about to say. Growing up in New York City, and me, Brooklyn, you, the Bronx, I think you have some automatic by birth street smarts. And I thought, well, this could be fun, and I can handle this. Not a big deal. And I remember the first day, Roberta, she was a county detective. She posed as my mother, and the only one that knew was the police chief. Friel, our police chief, and I had a detective in Bristol that was my contact, who I turned my drugs over to every day, and we'll talk a little bit about him in a little bit. Chucky Favoroso, who has since passed, a great guy, and the school board president, the district attorney, and the principal, but nobody else knew in the school, so it kept pretty quiet to like 6 people, which is actually pretty good in government and law enforcement. I remember my first day, though. I'm sitting in the guidance counselor's office ready to get my assignments. And the guidance counselor had no idea. Same thing. My parents were divorced, and I moved to Pennsylvania out of New York with my mom here. And we lived in an apartment. And I'm sitting next to another kid he's a long time adult now, but because he was a juvenile at the time, and just for the sake of keeping it nice and clean, I'll just make his name Johnny. That's not his real name. So Johnny's sitting there, and he got kicked out of a private school, and he had to go to public school for stealing a triple beam balance scale from the chem lab. So I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, you know what that means, right? This guy's into drugs. If he's stealing a triple beam balance scale, he's not doing experiments in his house. He wants to do some extra credit assignments. So this kid was a local kid, and we took right away. He became my friend. And I remember being at his house. He was Italian and Spanish. And his mother was an amazing cook. I remember being there on Sundays sometimes for dinner. And, afterwards people would say to me, well, how could you do that? I'm like, listen, this isn't personal, it's work, and he just introduced me to everybody. And we were off to the races right away. The kids took a liking. He kind of, kind of like La Casa Nostra, he vouched for me, and this guy vouched for me that we were buddies and we hung out all the time. And that was day one in week one. And then we'll talk about some buys and some incidences had. But so tell me your day one, what happened?
For me, I mean, I wish day one was that smooth. I spent like a week where, especially coming from the Bronx, from what I remember, when I came to Bensalem, I knew Knights Road, Street Road, and the Turnpike exit. That's all. And then they put me in this high school in Lower Bucks County. I have no idea. Oxford Valley Mall, what is that? Sesame Place? I have no idea. But that was my intro to Bucks County. So when I was at the school that first week, I had no idea. I knew no one. The kids would ask me, where are you from? I'm from New York. And for the grace of God, there was a girl in my the name of Dave Martinez. So she happened to know me because there were a couple kids in my class. So she sits with me at lunch and she's like, why don't you sit with us? I end up talking to this girl. She's from the Bronx. Wow. She goes, where are you from in the Bronx? I'm like, 181st. She goes, near the Bronx Zoo. I'm like, yeah, a block from the Bronx Zoo. She goes, so where'd you go to high school? I'm like, well, I was supposed to go to Roosevelt, but I used my dad's address. So she goes, well, I grew up at 182nd and Southern Boulevard, which is 2-3 blocks from where I grew up. And I'm like, thank God I was from the Bronx because she had me date that day. And then once her and I became friends, I met all the questionable characters and sat at their table, started playing basketball after school, got invited to parties. And from there, it just progressed and it went smooth. But that first week, I'm like, this is such a waste of time. I'm in. And you mentioned that all the people that you knew, the only one, my guidance counselor did know. And a lot of that was because if the principal wasn't there, someone would be there to respond. And
makes sense.
I got, quite a few of in-school suspensions that my counselor had to meet me with. And obviously it was in school because what good would I be outside of school suspended? Right. So I got to meet a lot of the bad kids in school suspension. So, but yeah, so the only other person would be my guidance counselor that knew. And this girl, I mean, Puerto Rican girl. So we hit it off and she rolled me right in, which and immediately introduced me to the potential, drug dealers in the school that were known. So that was my passage.
Yes. So, it's similar. It took you a little bit longer because you didn't have that luxury of being in, transferring in with a kid who's still a triple beam balance scale. But yeah, this guy, Johnny, he just introduced me to everybody. We started making buys pretty quickly, in school, during school, in the bathroom, on the field, in the, at recess time or whatever they call it, break, I forget what they call it now. And then I would hang out like with the kids after school on the weekends. I mean, this was a 7-day-a-week job, hanging out with these kids. And some people are probably listening to this, like, how can you do that? And I remember like the star quarterback, lost his, and I felt bad, you feel bad because you are a human being. You form relationships with these kids, but you got to check yourself and realize that this is not personal. This is business. And he lost his scholarship because he was dealing drugs. And he lost his college scholarship. The teachers, no one knew. And, crazy. I made honor roll. My name was actually in the newspaper. I did better the second time around in high school than the first time. But I could remember, I do remember one day I was on a street making a buy. a kid I've been trying to buy from, and we started talking. We were behind a building. It was 2 kids, Johnny and me. The 2 kids, one was a dealer, one was just his buddy. And I'm making the buy, and the other kid, not the dealer, but the other kid was staring at me. And you know how you get a feeling like, Dave, something's not right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh crap, something is not right. And that kid all of a sudden says to me, "You're a F cop." And I'm like, "What? You're a cop." And I'm like, "What? You're a cop?" Going back and forth. And so I made a buy. They sold it to drugs that night to me anyway, but I never gave them another chance. I never made a second buy from them because I wasn't giving them another bite of the apple. And then doing some research later, I gave that kid a ticket for the 4 or 5 months I was on the street in Bensalem. I stopped that kid, and he heard I had a heavier New York accent.
Right.
And there's not a lot of people in this area with heavy New York accents. And he heard my accent, and then I guess he saw me, and he just recognized me. And I just put him on the defensive, and I never gave them a second bite of the apple. That I was a cop. Yeah. And but that was like, for a minute, you're like, oh crap, is this going to be over now? And it wasn't. We just continued on. But go ahead.
Yeah, I had a similar incident. I played basketball like crazy. So you mentioned a young man, and I'm not going to use his real name, but he had a nickname, Buster. And Buster, we were like this. I ate at his house. I met his parents. We were day in, day out, 7 days a week. So if he paged me and he's like, "Dave, hit me up. Buster was huge into stealing stereo equipment and breaking into cars. And I'm going to say in that 5-6 months that I was at the high school, he must have broken into maybe 50, 60 cars. And that's probably at the low end. And Buster would call me. He's like, "Dave, we're going out this weekend if you want to come out with us." And I'm like, "No, I'm good. The great thing was with Buster, he knew that my uncle was strict. So I always said, like, my uncle would drug test me. So I can't smoke weed with you guys. I can't. So he's like, "Nah, understood. So we ended up, he learned that I had a storage location where I had all my belongings that my uncle paid for. And so he would, on Monday, he's like, "Dave, can I hook up with you? I got to give you all that stuff that we got this weekend." I'm like, "Sure." Kicker boxes, head units from cars. Everything from like wallets, pocketbooks that they found in cars. And he's like, "Yo, can you just stash them?" "Yeah, no problem." It was actually a cell at the Falls Township Police Department that we just kept putting things in. And the issue was when he calls me and he's like, "Dave, can we get that Kenwood radio out?" And I'm like, "Let me call. I got to check with my uncle. He has the key." And I would go meet with Jack Jones. "Jack, I need the radio." He goes, "Kid, we can't be giving out evidence. It's stolen stuff." I'm like, "Well, I'll find out who it's going to." So I would have to go with Buster, sell the person that's buying the radio from him, and make a note in my diary.
Representative, can you, I think it's one of the things I wanted to get through, and I know it's probably it's a longer process that I'm going to ask you to dive into. How does an idea become a law?
So, I'll give you a great example, right? Our United Way, they have a help center in Bristol. It's this great little, it's pretty big shop now, but they help people out in need. And I was down there for their 5-year anniversary, just stopping by to congratulate them. And I was talking to the CEO, and, we just were making small talk, and the idea of early childhood education came up. And it's a space I've been involved with. Shelby Labs, also from Bucks County, has been very involved with it. Both of us have young children now. And, Marissa gave me she had this great idea, and we were just making small talk on it. And from there it went, I went back to I sit on the Children and Youth Committee. I had a meeting set up with the United Way staff and our committee staff, the attorney on our staff, about the idea, about the feasibility of it. And then we started moving on it. We realized it was a possibility. So in Harrisburg, the first thing you do is, once you have an idea because somebody came to you about it or you've talked, you introduce what's called a co-sponsorship memo, and that says, hey, I'm going to do this. And you can keep that memo out there for a day. You can keep it out there for 2 years. But if other people are interested, they'll add their name to that co-sponsorship memo, so that when the language is finally created and you introduce it and you get a bill number, all those names are printed at the top. And then that bill is then referred to a committee. The Speaker of the House refers the bill to whichever committee it thinks is relevant. And then it's up to the committee chair whether or not they're going to hold a hearing on it, whether or not they're going to vote on it. So as you know, conventional wisdom is most bills just die in committee. Thousands of bills get introduced, and you know, committees can do absolutely nothing, or they can be very active. But once it comes out of committee, that's called first consideration. It goes to the House on second consideration, and that's where you may have an opportunity to amend it or not. What we've learned is that certain amendments that the majority party does not like, they do a procedural motion called tabling the amendment. So, you know, it's an amendment to say everybody gets a free dog or cat in Pennsylvania. They don't want to vote on it, so they table the amendment, and then you vote on tabling. So it's meant to protect members so that they don't have to vote on something or not. And then if it goes that way, if it passes on second consideration, which it almost always basically always does. There's a procedural way to defeat it, but I won't explain that. And then it goes to third, and that's where you vote up or down on it. And then if it passes, it goes to the Senate, and the process is almost exactly the same in the Senate. So it gets that, you know, there's a lot of barriers for government, and there's a lot of arguments for why that's good, because bad ideas just can't race through the process. And, you know, it's a feature of our system, all the gridlock. But it can be incredibly frustrating, and you know, you got to put in the time, you got to talk to your colleagues, you got to put in time with maybe talking to the chair, you got to convince people on the other side why it's a good idea, why they should support it. And it's part of the job. I knew what I was signing up for.
I've been here with the Sheriff's Office for 13 years. Prior to that, served in the Army for 7 years, 6 years active service, and then 1 year reserve. 2 tours overseas, as you mentioned, and then got me here to the Sheriff's Office shortly after that. For as far as the scope unit goes, we have been actively on the street for 3 years, and our main mission is to connect with our community members and assist them with mental health, addiction services, and homelessness, and even some mentoring when we get a chance to. And we get to see mainly the mental health and the addiction services here in the courthouse on a daily basis. Every time we show up for work and we have a court list here, we're going to find something that's got either a mental health component to it or an addiction component to it. So it's something that we do daily here in the office, and we're going to continue to. I mean, sadly, it's that much of a problem where we get it daily, but you know, we're doing what we can to try to help out.
Yeah, it's great. And you know, when I first got here, I was like, well, why is the Bucks County Sheriff's Office, you know, why would when you proposed scope to me, and there was something before I got here, another program, we modified it, but I know the previous sheriff Milt got something started right before he left, and then we kind of tweaked it into a different version, and Milt did a great job with it. You know, I got to give credit where credit's due. But we really, I think, in the words of Emerald Lagasse, we kicked it up a notch. Mm-hmm. You being a foodie, I guess that's a good analogy, because you are a foodie. But I can't eat the stuff you eat, the crazy stuff you have at your desk. I'm just can't do it. But it sounds like you were going the wrong direction. On a big highway. That's not what we should be doing. But then when I learned. One of my, because I say it over and over again, one of the things I've preached since I got here and I ran on, and I believe in this day, and this will always be one of the mantras of the Sheriff's Office, is to keep local police on the street handling 911 calls. When you call in Bucks County, because we're at Commonwealth, when you call 911, you get local municipal police and they respond to your house. So one of the scenarios I talk about is the police getting a call for maybe unwanted subjects, or maybe a disorderly subject, or what we used to term as vagrants, although that's probably not a PC correct term anymore, but oh well. And they might have a warrant for their arrest. So the local police would run them. They come back for a warrant. That takes a cop off the street. tied up with dealing with a person who's really not causing a big problem, but they're wanted and the cops have to deal with it. But what does your team do, Todd, during the daytime and even working at nights if need be? What does your team do specific with that problem? Because I want to dissect a couple of things. You gave us a good overview, but I want to deep dive into it, your unit. But what do they do with that scenario?
So with that scenario, we will try to reach out to the police departments, or if they can reach out to us, we will go out and meet that individual face to face. And what we do is we try to build a relationship with them, build a rapport with them, see if there are any needs for any addiction services or any mental health services. And if so, we take over that case to where we are interacting with that individual personally, and it keeps the cops on the road doing what they do. So we always encourage the local law enforcement, if you have issues that are, continual, like say 911 calls or whatever it might be, and you maybe see a mental health or an addiction component to it, reach out to us, let us take that individual on. We will, meet them face to face. We'll sit down with them. We'll continue to follow up with them. Just keep that relationship going to where it becomes now a case that we handle, and the local law enforcement can keep doing what they're doing.
I mean, you and I, we believe that, people, as most of the police chiefs in Bucks County, but everybody's got different roles. People don't need to be, not everybody needs to be locked up.
True.
People, unfortunately, there is an insane amount of numbers of mental health, and the drug crisis continues. And I don't have the quote. I can't find it. I used to do it in a PowerPoint when I talked about co-responders, when we started co-responders in Ben Salem. But Benjamin Franklin, that's right, folks, Benjamin Franklin, one of our founding fathers, he identified back in the 1700s mental health in the Commonwealth. Of course, Ben probably spoke a little bit more eloquently than I do normally, but Ben identified it back then, and we can continue to face that problem here in mental health. And Todd, your group goes out and really, instead of these people being locked up and tying cops up, they go out and try to get them into mental health treatment or drug treatment, which at the end of the day is a lot cheaper and more valuable than incarceration. Basically our jails are full. We need them for hardened criminals, but not people that are suffering from drug addiction and mental health. Unless they're committing crimes, and it's a different ballgame.
Yeah.
But suffering from mental health and suffering from drug addiction does not make you a bad person or a criminal. So we got to make sure that they're not committing crimes, and that we can get them off the street into the proper treatment. And you got you and Sal and Justin doing these. The fact is, I could probably use 10 of you. There's that much work in Bucks County with the 640,000 people that we have in this county. So you guys are doing phenomenal work. And I know you were doing some stuff in the schools, right? Doing a lot, reaching out to kids at risk. And some people say, well, this isn't our job, but it is our job. I always look at anything to keep cops on the street and not engaging with more crime. If we could be a part of that, then that definitely is our job. And Todd, you gave me an amazing statistic last week. We double checked it because your numbers, I think, were off by 1 or 2, because you said it was like 0 and we found it was like 4. So the last couple of years, your guys had 300 or 400 contacts. I forget.
It's probably closer to 400.
Closer to 400 contacts with people, and there were 4 that are known to us, folks, that have are recidivist. Well, no, that's not a radio problem. That's just me getting in shock with that number that I just said. We're still on the air. 4 people that committed crimes again. This project, and that's what we know. Obviously, that's what we know. So this program is so successful. I couldn't imagine if we had 10 more men and women out there doing this, because there are so many people with problems. You're on the front line, not me. I'm here. I'm at the desk. You're out there. Tell me what that feels like to you, what that looks like when your guys are out there meeting with these people and getting into treatment, Todd.
I mean, it's amazing to see, because what we want to try to do is divert away from prison and from the criminal justice system if we can. Not everybody does need to go to jail. There are cases that obviously do, but if we can address the actual needs of that individual and keep them away from prison, and keeping them, into the treatment centers and stuff like that where they need to be, and it's just a win for everybody. But the problem is not going away. We're working together with co-responders, with all the different county resources that we have to try to reach these goals of keeping people out of jail and getting them into the treatment that they need. But it's an everyday struggle. It's not going anywhere. The big plus that we have on our side, compared to, say, local law enforcement, is we have time. And you've afforded us that time. You've given us the opportunity to go out and do these things on a daily basis. A lot of patrol officers don't have the opportunity to sit with a call for a couple hours at a time. They have calls backed up. They have to go to the next one, and they kind of have to move things along quickly. To whereas we can sit and spend time with the person. We can sit for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever it might be. We'll do that. I mean, I've had cases here in the courthouse where someone is going through a bit of a mental health crisis, and I can sit with them for 4 hours.
Right.
And it becomes that's the time needed to safely and effectively handle everything. And that's what we're allowed to do. And that's what you give us is our time. So
yeah. And some people might be like, well, Sheriff, you keep talking about, serving all these warrants that are out there. And by the way, we're down to 4,600 warrants, clearing them up. But this time does prevent people from creating more warrants and just backlogging the system, where our warrant squad has to go out, deal with them, or the patrol officers throughout the county. Mm-hmm. And you take places like Morrisville or Yardley or Bristol Borough or up north in smaller towns and boroughs, they might only have 2 or 3 cops on the street. Now they're tied up, 2 cops dealing with a warrant and watching this person and transporting him to the prison. At 3 o'clock in the morning, that means there's nobody on the street handling 911 calls, and that just is not acceptable to me. So the 3 and 4 hours sometimes that you guys put in on jobs is money well spent. But who are some of the people calling you for help with prisoners? Some of the judges in the county, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
They're dealing with people in their courtroom that are suffering from mental health. It's like, who are you going to call? Ghostbusters. They're who they're going to call, the scope unit. Yeah. And they call you, and then so what does that look like?
That's always an interesting call. I've had a couple cases here in the courthouse where a judge has called down to me directly at my desk and has asked me to come up to their courtroom because there was somebody that has a mental health component to what's going on, and I'm able to just sit with them and sit through the case with them. I had one individual that was unrepresented and she was by herself, and the judge just wanted me to sit and just say and hang out, and so I did, and we just talked, and we I was able to kind of de-escalate the situation as it was getting kind of worked up. But again, that's because we have the time to do it. If we didn't have the time to do it, we wouldn't be able to accomplish some of the things that we do.
And your guys are dressed in soft clothes, and folks, what that means is soft clothes are like T-shirts, or Todd's wearing a polo shirt today and maybe BDU pants or jeans. I really let them dress down when they're not in the courthouse doing courthouse functions or out doing other deputy functions that they have to look more official, to dress down, because that really puts especially people suffering from mental health issues or drug addiction, because they see uniforms, they think they're going to jail. They don't understand, because people can't comprehend that. Not that they can't comprehend, that was probably a poor choice of a phrase, but their mind just doesn't function like that. They see a uniform and they think it's going to be a problem for them. So we do take that stigma away, and you guys do dress down and going out dealing with these folks, because like you said, the problem's not going away. Todd, tell us, we have also in Bucks County, and it was Judge Boylan that run, right?
The
treatment court.
Yeah.
Ray Boylan is just an amazing human being. And all our judges. I mean, I've said this before, our judges are great here in Bucks County. But tell us a little bit about that treatment court, what that does, and maybe a lot of people don't know about Veterans Court here and stuff. So I know, Todd, you sit on those groups and you're very involved. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I sit on the teams for all 3 of our treatment courts, and that's Wellness Court, Recovery Court, and Veterans Court. So it's an opportunity for people that are, Wellness Court dealing with mental health issues, Recovery Court dealing with addiction issues, and then Veterans Court dealing with both of them, but as a military veteran. But it's a chance for them to come into a program to address their charges, but also try to get some real rehabilitative services along the way. And if they can complete a bunch of different standards or parts of the program that we have for them, they can get either lesser charges or maybe even charges dropped, hopefully, depending on what they are and how severe they are. But they're all 3 great programs for the county, and Judge Boylan does a phenomenal job running those treatment courts. And yeah, it's another opportunity to kind of address the needs that are there, rather than just lock up and forget about them.
Yeah. And I don't know what the number is in the county, but I know more and more departments have, again, when I came on in '87, there was very little women. You could probably count them on two hands, the amount of females, out of almost 1,000 cops. And now, I don't know what the numbers are in Bucks County, but there's certainly a lot more than we had when I came on. You probably weren't born in '87, were you? I know. How about no? The rest of you probably born in '87.
Me and I go around.
I don't know.
It is nice to see how many women are in law enforcement, though, because
I agree.
for 20 years in Morrisville, I was the only female.
Yeah.
And it was neat to be, the girl there, and whenever you needed something that I was capable of doing, or they wanted a female, but it's coming here with 8 or however many girls that we do have. It's nice, and we all, like you said before, we get along.
Yes.
We all work really well together. And to go back on what you said, if women want to get into law enforcement, some get intimidated because they're like, well, I'm a female, like I'm not as strong as a man. But I would say, like, remember, like, a lot of being an officer and a good officer is the gift of gab.
Yeah.
Being able to, I as a female have been able to talk down a 6'5", 300-pound muscle-bound guy when my partner's like, nip, nip, nip. Because it's the root,
a lot of
testosterone
flow. Yeah.
And so I would say, like, remember that, like, we are capable, to do that and do this job well.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's an excellent point. Years ago it was, you would try to hire, guys and big guys and all that, but it's not about that anymore.
Yeah,
It's about who can talk, your way out of a situation.
Yeah.
And we have, a group of folks here that go out and deal with the mental health, but you're right, and a lot of times the women are better at that than the guys. For so many reasons. They just have a way of calming people down, and it's not about who's the biggest anymore. It's who could articulate, who could talk, who could write. Report writing is so such an integral part of this job now. Documenting incidences and things like that. So that's an excellent point. We're always looking for new recruits, new people. And I can remember, you say, you were the only female in Morrisville. And I could remember years ago when we would have a female prisoner on the radio, like, is there any female officer working in the county right now? Just so they could search the female, because otherwise you couldn't search a female, and they got contraband, weapons, whatever. And it was hard. It was just hard to find somebody. You don't hear that anymore. There's a lot of women all over the county in a lot of different departments. I don't know what the breakdown is, but it's a lot higher now than it was 30, 40 years ago. I know Ben Salem has a decent amount of women. I know Bristol Township does. Falls, I think Middletown does. A lot of the towns, probably the smaller ones, not as much. I think Bristol Borough, I've seen some female officers on the street. So I've seen Bristol Borough has. Does Morrisville have any females now that you know of?
They have 2 females
there
now.
you go.
Yeah.
Out of how many officers? Like,
I believe, I want to say they probably have like 8 full-time officers.
That's pretty good.
So yeah.
That's a high percentage.
It is, yeah, absolutely.
That's a really high percentage. Thank you for joining us as we explore another aspect of law enforcement in Bucks County. To stay up to date on future episodes and gain further insight into the work we do, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about the Bucks County Sheriff's Office and the services we provide, please visit our website and be sure to download the official Bucks County Sheriff's Office app, available on Google Play and in the App Store. Join us next time for another in-depth look at law and order right here in Bucks County.